Are you going to start the webinar, Malika?
I can't, it's very broken up.
The webinar has started now.
Hi everyone, just thank you so much for joining us and coming to this webinar. It's really great that you've all been able to make it. I'm going to hand over to Anne Jalema, who's the Chief Executive of 350, to get us going. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim, and hello everyone, and welcome. It is a real privilege and a joy to be with you here today. In just 10 days' time, people on every continent around the world will be taking to the streets, to the squares, to the beaches, to the steps of their parliaments and town halls, more than 200 actions around the world to draw the line. For me, this is also deeply personal. I came to 350.org because I believe with all my heart that this is a defining moment for the future of the earth that we share. And I also believe that together we can change the outcomes of this moment. And by doing so, we will literally be saving the lives of billions of people, along with our forests, our rivers, our oceans, and millions of other species that we cohabit the earth with. The incredible team at 350, together with so many partners and communities, we are putting our energy into this mobilization because we believe this is the time for the climate movement to be visible, to show our unity, to show our strength, and to make ourselves impossible to ignore. We need to be out in the streets. We need to be out in numbers, showing the world that people everywhere have not stopped demanding urgent climate action just because our leaders are going the other direction. It can't stop at demonstrations. What happens in the streets must echo in our communities, in our schools, in our workplaces, in the choices that businesses make, in the decisions that investors make, and in what world leaders do, not least at COP30 at the end of this year. It has to translate into actions that will keep us on track for 1.5 degrees Celsius, protect lives, and secure a just and livable future for all of us. And the reason we're all here, and that I think you are here as well, is that we know we can only get there together. That means bringing in our longtime allies in the climate fight, but also reaching far beyond to workers, to faith communities, to Indigenous peoples, young people, business people, movements for racial, gender, and economic justice. Because stopping the climate crisis is not a single issue fight. It is the foundation for every kind of justice that we seek. And that's why I'm so excited and honored to be here with the panel today. You will be hearing from voices as diverse as our movement itself, from the Pacific Islands to the Amazon rainforest, from youth leaders to millionaire activists who are challenging wealth inequality, to researchers who study what makes people rise up together, to people working at the intersection of climate justice and peace. Each of them brings a piece of the story that we collectively are writing together. So with that, welcome once again. Thank you so much for being part of this moment. Let's get inspired, let's get ready, and in 10 days' time, let's show the world what it looks like when millions of people stand up and draw the line. I'm delighted now to introduce our first panelist. Tarek Loubani is a Canadian Palestinian physician and a member of the Greenpeace Canada Board of Directors. He's just come back from working at Nasser Hospital in Gaza, and we are extremely grateful to have him join us to share his perspective on the urgent connections between peace, human rights, and climate justice. Tarek.
Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you so much for all of you for attending. I got into climate justice before any other issue in my life. To me, it was very clear that our planet really needed all of us to act decisively and together to make something happen. My work on Palestine has become so deeply intertwined with that because what I realized was that the same forces that try to kill people like Palestinians or exercise a genocide walk hand in hand with the forces that exercise ecocide. And in fact, Palestine is facing an ecocide as much as a genocide, although we don't talk about it as much because it's a much more difficult topic to raise and to show, considering how little access we have to Palestine. I want to start with a very simple example. It's been basically 80 years in which the Israelis have, and the pre-Israelis, the forces, the militias that went on to form Israel, have been poisoning the planet and poisoning the land for Palestinians. For example, they would drop infected carcasses into water wells very early on, a small example of how they were making things unlivable. As time went on, one of the main things that represents the indigeneity of Palestinians, the olive tree, was constantly uprooted and destroyed. And of course, at the beginning of the war in 2023, what we saw was a Palestine, Gaza, that was largely self-sufficient in terms of its ability to feed itself. At one point in the mid-2000s, Gaza had the largest organic farm in the world, largely because a siege made it impossible to do anything but organic farming. Palestinians had used their knowledge of the land and their ability and their connections to other indigenous people who knew how to work the land to make it so that they could get food from the land organically. When the war began, there was independence of poultry, of almost all vegetables, of many fruits, and of many foods. And one of the first things that the Israeli military did was to raze all of the land. At the moment, 99% of all productive land that existed before the war is either completely destroyed, has been bulldozed, or inaccessible. And of course, this is not consistent with any kind of normal military doctrine. This is simply about eliminating people. If we look at Palestinians as being a microcosm of us, then what we see is what these companies are doing, what the corporations are doing to all of us. In order to make profit, they destroy the planet, and by destroying the planet, they make it impossible for us to live. Justice is so deeply intertwined and so deeply tied. We know, again, like I had said, that genocide and ecocide are siblings that walk hand in hand. They have to one accompany the other. And that's what we're seeing on our planet as well. When we fight for Palestinians' rights, when we fight for Palestinians' land, we fight for all of our rights and all of our land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarek. Words from the heart. Our second speaker hardly needs an introduction in climate circles. Brianna Fruin is a Pacific climate warrior, a youth activist from Samoa, and someone who has been leading and inspiring since she was just 11 years old when she co-founded 350 Samoa. From the Pacific Islands to the stages of COP, Brianna has been a really powerful voice reminding the world that her people are not drowning, they are fighting. We are so honored to have you with us today, Brianna. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you all of you for having me in this virtual space. I actually wanted to start by acknowledging Dr. Tarek and your sharing this morning. There's a saying in Samoan, "Longo tai wa longo uta." It means what is found in the coast is found in the land, or what is found in the east is found in the west. And it's a lesson in our connection. And so I think to start our panel and this conversation off in the very important topic of what is happening in Gaza and what is happening in Palestine was a really good way to, I guess, ground us in this conversation. So thank you, Dr. Tarek, for doing that for us. So Talofa, my name is Brianna, as Anne said. I am very proud to be not only a daughter of the Pacific and someone who is raised by a beautiful community here in Samoa, but I'm also very proud to be a part of the Pacific Climate Warriors, who are a network of community organizers, climate activists, educators, storytellers, and people who care deeply about our planet and about our islands. We remind the world that we are not drowning, we are fighting. And this is a mantra that we, as Pacific Climate Warriors, have gathered behind. It really is more than a mantra, though. It is a reclamation of identity and of story, right? So for so long, the media and the global north had told us what we are in the climate fight, that we were victims. And they never told this fuller picture that we were more than just victims of the climate crisis. We were survivors. We were movers and shakers on the ground working in grassroots to adapt and to mitigate to the climate crisis. And so this mantra was a reclamation of narrative, and it was a changing of story, and not just story that we told the world, but story that we told ourselves in the Pacific. So in this narrative, we intentionally went from victim to warrior, and now we are trying to reclaim more of our narrative to go from warrior to world changer. So being more than just, no, we don't want this, but yes, we want this, and this is the world and the Pacific Islands we're trying to build. But in all of this work that we get to do today, as warriors, we are also a product of legacy. There were countless environmental activists and civil rights and social activists from the Pacific that came before us. We have movements like the Nuclear-Free Pacific movement that started before our climate movement. And we walk in the path that they blazed and that those activists and those freedom fighters blazed. And one of the paths that our elders and our leaders also paved for us was this fight for 1.5 and making 1.5 a limit that we weren't able to move. And so in the earlier COP negotiations, for COP21, when we were negotiating a 1.5 target, it was told to us, to Pacific Islands, that it was impossible, that the 1.5 target in the climate conversations was not going to happen. And I don't know if anyone was in Paris and if you remembered, but the UNFCCC branding around the pavilions was actually 2 degrees. And they were celebrating a 2 degrees limit. And Pacific Islanders stood their ground. They said, no, there is no survival for us at 2 degrees. We know that 1.5 must be the limit for so many of our smaller islands to survive. And so in the early hours and late nights, our climate negotiators, our ministers, our Pacific leaders fought in between corridors and bilaterals and negotiation rooms for 1.5 to be in the Paris Agreement. And in the end, we got it. And that became a new standard. And if I think that fight wasn't fought in Paris, 2 degrees would be something that would be the line. And it wouldn't have been the 1.5 goal that we have today. And so in 10 days, the legacy of 1.5 to survive continues with the Pacific Climate Warriors. We are saying that we are drawing the line at 1.5. We have warriors across our region and even in the Pacific diaspora across the world who will be taking action in their homes and telling the world that we are drawing the line at 1.5 and we are holding this line for our people. And we aren't just doing this for our environment or for our islands, but also for our future generations, because we are a product of legacy. We hope to be building a legacy that our children will be proud to take on. And so that's why we're very fortunate to be a part of this global movement. And I started in proverb, and I would also like to end in proverb. Another saying that Samoans have is "Ele maua se lolo I se popo e tasi," which means you will not get coconut cream or coconut milk from one coconut. that you need to be working with many. And that's why this global coalition of the willing and those of us who have come together to hold the line across our communities is so important because, as Anne said in the beginning of our conversation, we will only get there together. So what a pleasure it is to be here together with you all.
Thank you so much, Brianna. And I'm feeling a real connection with you because in my part of the world, in Southern Africa, we also love our proverbs. And the saying that we often like to quote that came up for me when you were speaking and talking about 1.5 is it always seems impossible until it's done, which is Nelson Mandela. So thank you for reminding us that it seems impossible until we actually do it. I am delighted to welcome next Chuck Collins. Chuck is the director of the program on inequality and the common good at the Institute for Policy Studies and a member of Patriotic Millionaires. He's been one of the leading voices on the intersection of wealth inequality and climate justice, showing how economic justice and climate justice go hand in hand and how those with privilege can actually play a crucial role in pushing for fairer systems. Chuck, thank you for being here. Over to you.
Thank you, Anne. It was great to be with you, Tarek, and hear you, Brianna. And greetings from the hills of Vermont. I get to be outside talking to you, which is really exciting. And as Anne said, I'm a researcher and campaigner at the Institute for Policy Studies, but I'm also part of this group, the Patriotic Millionaires. That's because I won the lottery at birth. My great-grandfather was the meat packer Oscar Mayer, which in the United States, people grow up hearing jingles for hot dogs, and there's a car called the Wienermobile, and Lunchables, and all these meat products. Anyway, that's my family heritage, and the Patriotic Millionaires are high net worth people who sort of understand the dangers of growing extreme inequality and growing climate disruption, and are speaking up more publicly. We think that obviously extreme inequality is inflaming the climate crisis. It's making the situation worse, just in the way industrialized countries in the global north have to do the most to change our behavior. The people who are the wealthiest people in our societies have the most to change. We are the super emitters. We have a huge amount of power in the political system. And if we're not making changes, it's hard to build solidarity and ask others to make changes. So, I think we generally believe we should be taxing billionaire wealth of the top, 1/10 of 1%, and investing in the climate transition, including repair and funds to support work in the global south. How do we get there? I just would say there's three really important reasons why we have to address extreme inequality if we want to address the climate change. One, as I said, the wealthy, we as a group, are the super emitters. Our carbon footprint is thousands of times the level of Brianna's neighbors. We have multiple properties, luxury travel, private jets and yachts, gas-guzzling vehicles. As Oxfam pointed out, the top 1% is responsible alone for 16% of emissions, and historically much more. Second reason is extreme inequality undermines solidarity. It's very hard to organize, particularly in the United States, to get other people to be motivated to change their behavior if a billionaire is flying their private jet across town for lunch. We have to basically tax high levels of luxury consumption and tax wealth to discourage that behavior. The super wealthy have to change their behavior the most, not wait for everyone else. The third, is power. And some of the fossil fuel oligarchs are using their power to block alternatives, to block the pathway to a green economy. And in the same week that the United States stopped a wind project off the state of Connecticut that was 85% done, we also renewed the right to keep open these zombie coal plants. This is entirely kind of an oligarch intervention in U.S. policy. The fossil fuel industry industry's gone all in for this president, and they're getting the payback of seeing their, the rules, the rolled back in terms of climate, and these zombie coal plants being kept open, for example. So climate disruption is an inequality issue. It's an extreme wealth inequality issue, and we have to address that directly. And we want to be partners with all of you in thinking about how to engage the ultra wealthy, because there is no planet B. Everybody has a stake in this, and we need to tax these extreme concentrations of wealth, both to diminish the wealth and power, but also to move the resources to solve the problems and repair the historic inequities. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Chuck. I mean, it's one of the elements of the just energy transition that is maybe not so much discussed or known, but it is super important, the way that the fossil fuel economy has allowed the concentration of wealth in the hands of those who control the extractive industries, and the way that distributed renewable energy could actually change the distribution of wealth and power in our society. And that concentration of extractivist wealth is also extreme in Brazil. And indigenous peoples, as well as the Amazon, are the ones paying the price for that. And our next speaker, Luan Caripuna, is an indigenous communicator with an association of indigenous people, APOIANP is the acronym, and a powerful advocate for the Amazon and indigenous rights. As we look ahead to COP30, which of course will be taking place not only in Brazil, but in the heart of the Amazon in Brazil, indigenous leadership has never been more crucial. And in fact, indigenous peoples are demanding a seat at the decision-making table in this and future COPs. Luan speaks for communities who are on the front line of land rights struggles, climate stress, inequality, extractivism, and survival. We are honored to learn from her today. She is joining us with a video rather than in person. She recorded a video some moments ago as she's currently in an Indigenous Coalition meeting in a remote area, and her connectivity did not prove to be up to the task of joining us live, but we'll play her video for you now.
Olá, bom dia. Eu sou Luane Caripuna, coordenadora executiva da Articulação dos Povos e Organizações Indígenas do Amapá e Norte do Pará. Eu gostaria muito de hoje estar ao vivo com vocês, presente nesse bate-papo importante, onde nós estamos traçando um limite de discussão, mas também um limite para a vida. Infelizmente, não pude estar ao vivo com vocês, porque nós estamos realizando, durante essa semana, a Assembleia dos Povos Indígenas do Amapá e Norte do Pará, onde reúne mais de 11 povos indígenas, e é uma organização na qual eu sou coordenadora executiva, então, infelizmente, não pude estar nesse momento com todos. Mas eu estou aqui deixando um recado para vocês, a minha mensagem, para que a gente possa traçar esse limite pela vida dos povos, pelos conhecimentos tradicionais, pela vida do mundo, mas também traçando esse caminho até a COP30. Então, é muito importante estar nesse debate onde nós vamos lançar essa caminhada de traçar o limite nesse mês de setembro e da importância de ouvir as vozes dos povos indígenas, de quem de fato está convivendo diariamente nos seus territórios e já sentindo os impactos de empreendimentos, impactos climáticos, questões que impactam diretamente a vida de todos. Nós estamos nos unindo a essa mobilização de limite porque nós acreditamos que nós precisamos limitar agora e fazer um debate sobre as nossas vidas. Não dar mais para esperar. Os nossos territórios são impactados diretamente, a vida do mundo está sendo impactada diretamente, e nós somos essas vozes que conhecem o território, que têm sentido os impactos diretos e que têm trazido esse debate para espaços na qual muitas vezes nós não temos vez e nem voz. Então, nós estamos nos unindo a esta campanha pela vida dos povos, pela preservação dos nossos conhecimentos e pela natureza, pelo esse território ancestral que nós, há milhares de anos, convivemos, mas não destruímos. Mas, nesse processo, nós somos os principais impactados. porque quando há uma mudança extrema no nosso território, ou uma mudança no clima, isso impacta os nossos conhecimentos tradicionais. O nosso diálogo com a natureza é quebrado, o nosso diálogo com o meio ambiente ele é quebrado. Então, nós estamos nos unindo para que nós possamos impulsionar mais a luta pelo nosso território, pela nossa territorialidade e pelo direito dos povos indígenas no mundo. E, principalmente, trazendo para essa discussão o limite de não exploração de petróleo na Amazônia, não exploração de petróleo no mundo, pois petróleo e COP30 não combinam. O Brasil é contraditório no debate quando se traz a maior conferência sobre clima para o Brasil e, ao mesmo tempo, quer explorar petróleo na Foz do Amazonas, assim leiloando vários outros blocos, como foi leiloado no início do ano. Então, a gente está aqui também para dizer que se o governo brasileiro ele quer ser protagonista no debate sobre meio ambiente, sobre preservação territorial, sobre cuidado, ele precisa excluir o sistema de exploração de petróleo e precisa excluir esse modo de energia que polui, que destrói os territórios e que tem acelerado a crise climática. Nós estamos a caminho da COP30, um espaço extremamente importante, mas nós não queremos só ser as pessoas que vão sentar na cadeira para ouvir os políticos discutirem sobre a nossa vida. Nós queremos fazer parte do debate, porque nós já temos iniciativas no nosso território que são concretas, que são realidade e que estão sendo feitas a partir do território, a partir das pessoas que vivem ali. Então, a COP30, no Brasil, ela tem que ser uma virada. O limite de virada, porque nós não queremos mais um momento apenas de fazer acordos e mais acordos, como é o caso do Acordo de Paris, onde não se tem resultados concretos sobre essas ações que os países precisam desenvolver para chegar a 1,5 graus. Nós queremos que a COP30 ela seja essa virada, esse limite de virada, para que os povos indígenas sentem na cadeira, no debate, como pessoas que conhecem esses territórios e que têm esse conhecimento milenar para frear a crise climática. Nós estamos no limite da vida, no limite de perder tudo. E nós temos que ter a consciência que isso depende da ação de todos no mundo inteiro. Então, esse momento é extremamente importante para essa virada. Por isso que o The Limit é a campanha que vai impulsionar esse debate. Nós estamos nos unindo, porque juntos nós somos mais fortes e a resposta somos nós. São os nossos territórios, são as pessoas que estão aqui reunidas conosco, mais de 11 povos trazendo as nossas vozes. Então, acredito que esse é um momento extremamente importante, que nós todos que estão aqui precisam fazer a nossa parte. Mas em rumo à COP30, nós queremos ser ouvidos, porque nós queremos que os nossos territórios sejam preservados e que eles sejam cuidados da maneira ideal. Nós temos visto também o último discurso do presidente Lula, que é explorar petróleo na Amazônia de maneira sustentável. E aí, eu sempre digo, não existe usar a palavra sustentável numa exploração de petróleo, numa exploração de combustíveis fósseis, que já são cientificamente comprovados que são os que mais destroem e aceleram a crise climática. Então, o Brasil, ele está do lado da vida ou ele está do lado do petróleo? Nós temos que fazer essa pergunta, porque não adianta mascarar no nossos discursos da presidência de que explorar petróleo de maneira sustentável vai solucionar os problemas sociais. Os problemas sociais do Brasil e de qualquer outro espaço é falta de má gestão e falta de investimento em oportunidades em educação. Porque não se pode pegar a esperança de vida das pessoas e usar com ela como venda. E é isso que o Brasil tem feito. Tem feito um discurso bonito para fora, mas em suas ações tem sido contraditório, porque soberania nacional, porque precisa explorar petróleo, chega. A Amazônia é o limite da vida, e nós precisamos dizer isso agora, e todos têm que se levantar para isso. Por isso que nós estamos aqui para dizer, a Amazônia é vida, e ela é a nossa vida. Se a gente não cuidar dela, não terá mais Amazônia para nós. Se a gente destruir o pulmão do mundo, não terá como respirar nesse mundo. Então, esse é o momento de virada até a COP30. Nós precisamos trazer esses pontos com muito mais firmeza e com muito mais força.
Fantastic. So with those words echoing in our ears about the urgency of concrete change and real decisions, it is appropriate that we hear next from Sam Nadell. Sam is the director of Social Change Lab, which is a research organization dedicated to understanding how grassroots mobilizations like Draw the Line can actually drive real political change. His work focuses on how movements can turn people power into policy impact. And folks, after Sam, we will be coming to the Q&A section of the webinar. So please use the Q&A function rather than the chat to put your questions. The Q&A, there's a button just to the right of center on the bottom of your screen. It's a little box with a question mark in it, and then at the moment there's a red circle showing the number 2. That's the right place to put your questions for the speaker. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks everyone for such great contributions. Fantastic panel. I think we've just been able to see just the breadth of ways in which the climate emergency affects all of our lives in different ways, and the range of ways in which we can engage in activism and do change making in such a variety of ways. And as Anne said, my organization, Social Change Lab, researches activism and social movements to try and understand how movements, how mobilization and how protests can be effective, and when it works and when it can be counterproductive. And the headline finding really is that, of course, mobilization can do a lot of good and can really advance the cause for addressing the climate emergency, can be uniquely effective at raising awareness, shifting public attitudes and narratives and applying pressure on institutions. But success is in no way guaranteed, clearly, right? So it doesn't just matter that we protest, but how we protest is incredibly important. So I'm going to share 5 key headlines from our research. From now, there's decades worth of research on social movements that we can draw on to try and make sure that we're being as effective as possible. And so 5 key areas that I can highlight today. One, and this has come up a few times already, numbers really matter, right? And this is why Draw the Line is such an important initiative to try and rally the troops. I think back to Brianna's proverb from earlier on, you won't get the coconut cream from only one coconut, right? So it's important that we mobilize a mass movement, and it's important that we mobilize a wide range of groups. All the research shows that numbers are probably the most important factor that are going to help you realize your goals as a movement. More numbers means more pressure on institutions. It means more pressure on policymakers and corporations to change their behavior. And this, I'd say, is a basis for optimism, right? We're starting from quite an advantageous point as a climate movement because of decades of work, really effective work in campaigning. All the polling shows that a majority of the population globally cares about the environment, is concerned about climate and the environment, and wants more ambitious efforts, right? So the challenge isn't to wake people up necessarily. I mean, we can do more of that, but the challenge really is converting that concern into action, getting people to get off their seats and take action. And a final point on numbers: the more people you have, the more likely you are that you have a diverse movement, right? And again, the research is very clear. Diversity is vital. Diversity in all its forms, right? You need to have a movement that represents different political constituencies, different ethnicities, religions, socioeconomic backgrounds. That's a way to ensure that policymakers and the institutions listen, that you're showing you're representing a wide swathe of the population. The second point that really matters is resources, right? Movements don't emerge spontaneously. They need infrastructure, and they need funding, and they need training. And movements can't sustain without resources, right? You can have a wave of activism, but often these causes take years, decades, even centuries sometimes. And so we need to make sure that the movement is properly funded. And there's lots of research. We've done our own research here showing grassroots movements in particular are criminally underfunded, right? So it's incumbent on donors, on philanthropy, on private foundations, and the NGOs themselves to fund movements, right? To provide those resources. The third point is leadership. Leadership, of course, is so important. We know from across history some of the most successful movements, whether that's the civil rights movement or the Indian independence movement, like charismatic leaders have been so key. The climate movement has had a number of charismatic leaders. I mean, I'm just thinking about people on this call, for example, Brianna and Luana and many others, Mia Motley, Elizabeth Watuti. There's so many leaders in the movement, and I think that's really key. Leaders play a really important role in defining a narrative, in uniting broad grievances into a shared story that people can get behind. I think an interesting thing about leadership is it can be really effective when it's coming from unexpected circles. So I think back to the youth strikes and Greta Thunberg, and you forget how unusual that was to see at the time, a load of school kids just bunking off school and demanding change. And that was a really effective, they were really effective messengers. Or Chuck on the call from the Patriotic Millionaires, right? So wealthy people challenging economic inequality. These are good spokespeople because they subvert people's expectations about what an activist looks like. Non-violence is vital. You know, the long tradition of non-violent civil disobedience is, of course, really important. A common claim you hear from critics of mobilization and protest is that it creates backlash, right? It turns people against the very cause that you're trying to unite people around. Our research doesn't show that, right? We haven't seen this backfire effect from most of our online experiments or from public opinion polling, right? People don't express less support for climate and environmental action just because they see a protest they don't like, unless there's the protest is perceived as violent or extreme. Right. And then you do see those backfire effects. So sticking militantly to non-violence, I think, is really important. And finally, events, right? We can't underestimate the importance of trigger events. And again, looking across history, whether this is different movements that have responded to world wars, to pandemics, for example, capitalizing on those moments when the social system is fractured to drive a moment of social and environmental progress. Sadly, there's no shortage of trigger events that the climate movement can draw on, right? Just today in Bali, more deadly floods, wildfires around the world, record temperatures. This isn't something we should be happy about, but these are moments that the movement can speak to trigger the next mass movement, right? And that's something that we all have to make sure that we're doing. So I will stop there. Just a summary to say, the research is clear. Protest, mass mobilization can work. It has worked in history and it can work again in future. And this is hopefully, we hope, another moment where people stand up and demand action. And we can just think about those 5 things: numbers, resources, leaders, non-violent tactics, and trigger events. Have those in our mind as we think about our next steps. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for being so practical as well. I think it's unusual to find somebody who does rigorous academic research and really thinks about tactics and how we be effective when we're out there on the streets. So that was really super useful. Thanks so much. So thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your wisdom, your stories, and your vision. Yeah, I mean, like Sam said, what the inspiration and depth and breadth of what we've just heard really reflects the power of the moment and of the movement. From the Pacific Islands to the Amazon, from questions of peace and economic justice to the strategies that actually make movements succeed, all of these threads come together into one truth. This is the time to draw the line. And I already see a number of questions in the chat about how we do that as effectively as possible. And I'm going to come to those in a moment. I'm actually going to give the panelists a heads up. There are a number of questions in the chat about how can we coordinate across borders to put pressure on powerful countries, whether it's the US or Israel or Brazil, that are actively blocking the just transition that we so urgently need. So just to give the heads up to the panelists to think a little bit about that, because in a moment I'm going to come to you to provide your insights. But I first want to deal with a couple of really practical questions that have also come up in the Q&A section. So first of all, an anonymous attendee is asking a really important question about safety. As someone with a disability, this person says, using a power chair, I've been hesitant to protest in person due to safety, etc. Is my concern valid, and how can I participate? Is there anyone on the panel or from the 350 team who would like to speak to that question?
Maybe if nobody else jumps in, I can talk to this a little bit, Anne. So in terms of safety, I kind of look at safety as for a person with a disability as having three main dimensions. One of them is the chronic condition. I'm assuming it's a chronic condition. The chronic condition and its implications out in the world. So obviously you have to plan. You're probably better suited to know how to plan that condition than anyone else. So just making sure that both you and somebody you trust is able to understand everything that needs to happen. For example, you're diabetic, then you and somebody else should have insulin and glucose, things like that. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is potential confrontations with authorities, especially the police. Generally, it sounds like this person might not have come to many events, but generally there are layers of confrontation. And it's seldom the case that you're overrun all of a sudden out of nowhere. You almost always have good indicators that the police are coming or that you're going to be in a tough situation like that. For your first protest, that's probably a good general rule for everybody's first protest. You should probably be an unarrestable, understand what that means, have legal support, but also have somebody experienced who can detect that arrests are coming or that police action is coming and can pull you out of that situation. And then the third aspect is, I think, the post period after the protest and aftercare, which can involve things like legal repercussions. So be aware that the police don't always only come for you during the event. So overall, I think the general advice is, yes, these protests are really safe. The more people, the better. And the more people with disabilities who are there, the safer everybody feels, people with disabilities and people without. So please come on out. You'll find a deeply loving and welcoming space and a place that's going to work its hardest to keep you safe.
Thanks so much. Great answer. Really good advice. Okay, so there's a number of people wondering how can we work together to put more effective pressure on powerful leaders and powerful countries that are actually actively blocking progress or moving us in the wrong direction. And Brazil has been cited by a few people. So let's take Brazil as an example, especially given what Sam just said about the importance of trigger moments. We know we have COP30 coming up. We know Brazil will be very much in the spotlight. And as we heard in the video, Brazil is putting a lot of rhetoric and fine words out there about its leadership on climate, but the reality is they are pushing oil in the Amazon. So what experience or insights do people have maybe from other movements or protests that you've been involved in about how we can actually do this? Brianna, I wonder if you maybe want to speak to the example that you mentioned in your speech about the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my experience as a Pacific Islander in this movement, the Pacific has always banked on solidarity across community, right? We can't work in isolation. And so even getting 1.5 in the Paris Agreement was something that all Pacific nations and Pacific negotiators had to come together and organize within PCID, so the Pacific Islands, small island developing states. And so working in coalition of the willing is very important. So who do you have already on your side? And how can you self-organize or co-organize together to get more people who also believe in the same thing as you? And I think we have to be looking first regionally. So who can you organize with nationally, go regionally, and then expand internationally? And I will mention, because Brazil was mentioned, something that, in the movement we're also thinking of is if there is an Australia/Pacific COP after Brazil, how do we strategically build coalitions so that what is asked by our Amazonian brothers and sisters in this COP is something that will also stand firm and be asked in the next. And Luann is also a friend of mine that I got to meet this year because her community invited us as Pacific Climate Warriors to come to Brazil to the Free Land Camp. And at the Free Land Camp, we were able to build connection and build this international relationship from people from completely different places in the world. But we heard from them their priorities, and we got to tell them, well, these are our struggles and our priorities. Now, how can we organize together as two communities so that our voices are stronger? And we know that when we, as Sam said, take on more numbers, we're a little bit more strategic and a little bit more organized so that the solidarity is strong and it's solid amongst communities. And so that would be the advice that I would give, is that we just need to organize and become community organizers and build more community organizers.
I could jump in there as well, Anne.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of chat already around building this coalition that we know we need, because like ultimately we all agree on a lot. I'd say we should be realistic about the fact that coalitions are hard, right? Especially when you're trying to build an international coalition of groups from around the world. Even on this call, we're all talking about quite different things, and it's like bringing that messy group of people together can be very difficult, and it's sometimes been challenging. I think the COP has been an example where things have gone pretty wrong. I think back to Copenhagen, for example, where a group of NGOs wanting to find a relatively modest compromise, working with states, and then climate justice activists feeling betrayed by that. And this kind of pattern has played out again and again, sometimes for very understandable reasons. I think it's really interesting to look at examples where collaborations and coalitions have gone well, and often where they've addressed power imbalances, where you've got the large actors, which are often better resourced, who are working in support of activists. When has that worked well? And it often is about that supporting role. So the NGOs use their USP, which is their institutional weight, which is their resources, to provide support for activists in a way that has no strings attached, essentially. Like, we are here to support your voice. We're here to support you to amplify your voice in a way that suits you best. And that's incredibly difficult for many NGOs for lots of reasons, which we don't have time to go into. The final thing I would say is consensus isn't always the goal, right? And I think sometimes some of the most exciting and innovative stuff that movements have done have come out of disagreement, right? Creative tension that can come from people approaching an issue from very many different directions. Sometimes it's fiery, sometimes it's difficult, but quite often I think the climate movement has seen this. Moments of activism, of radicalism have come out of blazing arguments, right? And sometimes that is quite productive. And so I would say, let's not beat ourselves up sometimes if we don't always find consensus.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And do you mind if I add something to the comments as well?
Yeah.
I just wanted to build on what Brianna and Sam were saying with a kind of painful conclusion that I had arrived to. Because especially when I was younger, I always thought that the government didn't understand, or leaders didn't understand. And it took me quite some time to really come to terms with the fact that our governments hold us in contempt. Our governments don't care what happened to us and are very happy to hurt us. At best, they're nihilistic. And I think more realistically, they're just actively pursuing policies regardless of who they harm and how. So when Sam talks about the ways in which movements move, or when Brianna talks about that kind of solidarity, I think we have to create ourselves as a force that can't just withstand and stand up to government. We definitely can't co-opt it. It's too well designed against us, but that we can defeat it. That's, I think, our end goal, is to defeat these governments and make a better world.
Thanks, Derek. That's really inspiring. I want to go to a closely related question now from Stephen Kushner in the Q&A. So it's on a similar theme. He asks, the US as a government is not a friend of the climate anymore. Are there any ideas on how to make the leadership respond? And Chuck, particularly for you, is there anything that you see from the wealthy class that can be used to pressure the politicians? And I want to throw in a second question for you as well, Chuck, which is coming out in the chat, which is what is preventing the climate movement and others who are campaigning against inequality, like the labor movement? What is actually preventing us from working more closely together? Because these, particularly the relationship between climate and organized labor, has been really difficult to crack.
Well, those are good questions, and you probably have a better thought on the last question. But I think one of the things we're trying to look for in the United States is where are the cracks? Where are the cracks within the power elites? Where are the cracks and opportunities at state and local level to kind of build rebuild accountability? I mean, I think we're just reeling at the pace of how quickly things have gone in the wrong direction on so many fronts, and the power of the fossil fuel industry, the power of the extractive industries. But for instance, the wind project that was canceled in Connecticut, was a major labor union employer. So I think we immediately are working with those unions to sort of be part of the pushback on the cancellation of those projects. A whole bunch of renewable energy projects are sort of on hold, with huge negative impact in red states on the economy. So lifting up and showing that these are worker issues, employment issues in local economies, and sort of having that as a basis of pushing back. And then I think this whole, it seems almost impossible to raise the question of taxing wealth in the current context. I mean, it seems like we would be delusional to think that, but actually, I don't think this moment is going to last. I won't put a number of months or years on it, but it's not going to last forever. And our job is to incubate the powerful ideas, incubate them in state levels, and sort of be ready to push at the national level a tax on wealth, a tax on inheritances and high incomes, a surcharge on incomes that can go to climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and to fund U.S. obligations to the rest of the world. So keep talking, keep beating that drum, waiting for the cracks to open wider. And yeah, I think continuing to talk to labor and workers about how the current regime policies are harming workers and bad for the environment, and continuing to make the arguments I think 350 and others have done effectively about green jobs and employment. So and the labor movement's not monolithic. Some of the more powerful unions are kind of retrograde when it comes to climate policy, but not all of them. And to pick off the ones that have potential, we can build alliances with.
Thanks a lot, Chuck. Anyone want to add to that? I think we have space for like one more response before we wrap up. Okay. All right. I also see a lot of questions in the Q&A about what is going on in my part of the world. Please go to the Draw the Line website. I think it's already been put in the chat, but maybe somebody can just drop it in there again. You can see a map of everywhere that actions are taking place. More importantly, you can also register your own actions. So if you haven't already, please get together with some friends, cook up an idea, register your action. We would really love to have everyone involved, because as you've heard just now from our panelists, this actually, yes, it is about having a show of strength on a single day of action. That is important, that matters, but it is also about building momentum, building those relationships of solidarity and alliances around the world, and building the power that we ultimately need to change the rules, change the policies, change power relationships, all the way to COP30 and well beyond, so that we keep the planet livable for all of us and build a fairer and better world for every single person and species living on it. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, 350, for hosting us.
Thank you.
Looking forward to drawing the line with all of you.